Welcome back, everyone. Enough introductions. Let's talk about this week's class. I'm going to start off by sharing our screen, what it looks like. So when you come into week one, it's going to look like this. There are a lot of videos on introduction. I wanted to make sure they were short. They didn't go on so you can see this add up to about an hour. And nobody wants to sit and watch an hour-long video of a guy sitting in a chair talking about expectations. So I wanted to break this up a little bit. But besides getting oriented to the class, because this is 2 weeks in one, again, this is compact into an 8-week course. We're not just doing introductions this week, we're covering course content. And I want to talk a little bit about groups because that's why we're here. This is the old text that was used for a number of years, and it is pretty thin. When you get in here and read it, it's not very technical, which is, it's very accessible. That's good. Yet it leaves a little bit for folks that need to know more. The MCP students certainly need to know more. The education students also benefit from knowing more theory and understanding why we do certain things. And not to say that the MCP students don't as well, just it's also beneficial for each person. So I've integrated both books into each week, or tried to. You'll find them both really beneficial. This particular week, you'll notice chapters 1 and 2. So if you're like, crap, that's like probably 80 pages of reading. It's not. It's like 30 pages. Print is, it's not overly big or small. There's a few little pictures. But this group book, chapters 1 and 2. The other one, I'm only looking at, I think, chapter 3, pages 42 to 45, only 3 pages. Short readings. And there's plenty to do with looking through and getting oriented to the class. Our next week will deploy on Monday. The classes go from Sunday to Sunday, or no, Monday to Sunday, excuse me. Make a new module will deploy each Monday. I've given some resources here. These are for the Association of Specialists in Group Work. For those of you that are really into group, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to practice my main modus operandi. This is what I'm going to do. There are some resources there for you. I've got a group therapy video from the University of Tulsa here for you to read. But why are we doing group? Why focus on group counseling? Isn't it just enough? Isn't it good enough to do it individually? And I used to think this. I used to be pretty aversive to groups. When I was a student, I really loathed, and I will use that strong of a word, times when professors would break us off into small groups. I mean, if you could do a bigger eye roll than that, that's really what was going on internally for me when professors would say, I'm going to break you off into small groups. I just really, that just means you don't want to teach. That's how I interpreted that. As I've entered education myself and learned methods to the madness, the theory behind different approaches, although that may not be desirable for all people to go and jump into groups, you do get things out of that small group interaction that you don't get from just a one-person lecture. And so also goes, that's a metaphor, it's a parallelism to counseling, where I may feel very comfortable going to a person because I don't want everybody else, especially from Enid, Alva, Ponca City, Woodward. We're from small communities, right? Where I really don't want people to know my business. Not that I'm doing anything that's outlandish, but typically people go to counseling because they're hurting, because something's wrong, because they're in a state of incongruence. And I don't want to share that with everybody in the community, especially northern Oklahoma. It's a very, dare I say, judgmental community up here. Each person their own, oh, you'll never guess what so-and-so is doing. Blah, 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 blah. That's why I was so firm with confidentiality in one of the other videos. In a bigger city, which is where I've got a couple of books by Yalom here, thinking about like New York, back east. This is a group therapy book. I'll talk about this in just a minute. Going to like a big city like Dallas, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, where there's a group, yeah, sure, I'll go do that. I'm not going to do that in Northwest Oklahoma. That's my own bias growing up here, knowing certain groups that talk and are chatty, and yeah, there's FERPA, there's HIPAA, but people still talk. And so if you have some skepticism, you're reticent to believe that group may offer something to you, I'm okay. I'm with you. I'm right there with you because I didn't see this. Now, that said, as someone who has given hundreds of groups as a counselor, as a therapist, there are things that I cannot do, that I absolutely 100% cannot provide as a therapist in a one-to-one setting that happen in group. I can't all of a sudden morph myself into a teen to talk to that teen about what they're experiencing in their peer group, in their lives. I can't morph myself into a domestic violence survivor and talk through that lens to a person who is seeking treatment because they're in an abusive relationship. I can't morph myself into someone who's addicted to methamphetamine and meet that person where they are, who's seeking treatment because they're addicted. There are certain times that perhaps, I won't say just perhaps, I'll say that group is the appropriate method of treatment. If I'm somebody battling anorexia, food restriction, and I'm coming to help and I'm coming to a therapist, yeah, the therapist may be able to give some bits and pieces. If I'm a sexual abuse survivor and I'm coming to somebody, yeah, we can go through these techniques, but it's still, I'm dysfunctional. I've got something wrong. I'm the issue here. That's why I'm in treatment. It's what people asked of, why are you here? The first question, what's the problem? Why are you here? No. What happens in group, people tend to talk about what happened. People tend to talk about their own lives. their own relationships, their own responses to common events. And this is where you get a sense of, and we don't say this much, this word doesn't get used in today's pluralistic society. Not that it's wrong that it's not used, but in group, what emerges is something called universality. And what I mean by that is there's a part of the human connection, human condition, which connects us all. In other words, when you were a counselor or a lay person, lay helper in strategies and techniques, going back to last semester, and I said, break out of self-disclosure. Yes, as a counselor, you're not going to be able to relate with every person that's out there. But if you have an effective group and people have gone through similar things, they can speak. That is the time. I did this. I felt this. I struggled this way. And either it connects with the other people in the group or it doesn't. But the odds are pretty good that there is going to be a connection. And for a sexual abuse survivor who always has questioned, it's only me, it's only happened to me, I'm the problem here. And then all of a sudden you have 3 or 4 other people, I felt this, I did this, I was this, I responded this way. Then you're not alone. And that's when the tears happen. And that's when the universal condition happens. And that's when the connection happens. And that can't happen in a one-to-one counseling session. It can happen if people are in a safe place and can share. This aspect of universality of the human condition comes out. I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. And this can help. There's healing in that. That's the power of group. That's what I'm striving for in this class. It speaks to that a little bit on page 5 of this little textbook. And so, yeah, it's more efficient and economical. I'm just going to go with the bullet points on page 5 here. Yeah, at Youth and Family Services, where I worked for a while, there's a big push, get people into groups. Yeah, you can bill more. There's a big part of me that says there's also something that's primarily beneficial about that one-to-one connection with a counselor rather than being in a group of people, because we live in small town America. Best way to help people learn about how they interact with others. We'll be looking at that. I want you to really think about that for your own discussion board posts this week. How do you interact with others? What are your traits? Provides a good way to teach skills. Yeah, social skills. We're going to model social skills. When your clients, oh my gosh, he's going to ask me to be a client. Yes, I'm going to ask you to talk about personal stuff, but next week, that's between a 5 and a 7 on an emotional scale. I don't want you to talk about like the most stressful thing or most distressful thing in your life, but something that's between a 5 or 7 anxiety provoking type scale. Yes, I want you to be real. And so there's some authenticness, there's some authenticity, sorry, I'm making up words here. There's some authenticity to the discussion. There are ways that you can talk about that without being preachy. And so I don't want people to be preachy. When you're a client in a group, use the I messages. I feel. That is key. When you're a group leader and you hear somebody talking about, well, this happened and start blaming society and this is that party's fault, that's this party's fault. But how does that relate to you? How do you feel about that? Then it's okay. I said, don't say, ask how do you feel about that? Then it's okay to turn it around, because you're redirecting their ingrained, deflecting type of behaviors. You want people to start owning it themselves. I feel, how does that impact you? So social skills, we'll pick up some new social skills as group leaders and as group participants. It affords people to help others, to be helped. A lot of us are in this profession to help people, and you can help people in a different capacity if you're a group member. I just alluded to that a couple minutes ago. The fifth one is what I really spoke largely about, and it's what Yalom really says is the power behind group, is this sense of connection that you get with others, that you're not alone. I've seen it. The reason why I go to that is because I've seen it. I've seen it in action. I've seen a 12-year-old girl learn about another person who was abused by their mom's boyfriend throw up in group because that happened to her, and she thought she was alone. And this girl, prior to this, was horrible to be around, was rude, cussing, defiant, horrible to be around. After this, I watched her turn white as a sheet and throw up in the group while another person was disclosing. It came to find out that Christmas, her mom's boyfriend had done things to her, and she hadn't told anybody. This is March. And after that, after she disclosed, she didn't disclose in the group. The other counselor, my colleague, went and talked to her, and then she disclosed to her. After that, there's a different girl, approachable, friendly, helpful. That's just one. That's one that came to my mind. But when these things happen, it's not something that I could do as a therapist. It takes to other people. And lastly, on this page, on number 5, it provides an opportunity to experiment with new types of behaving. And so if you are doing individual counseling and you're working with people on, I'm not very assertive, I don't like being around others, well, try this group. This is the place to be free. And if you're in a safe place where it's non-judgmental and it's confidential, that confidentiality is 100% driven by the group members. If you're able to provide a space where the group becomes cohesive, everybody kind of bonds together, and there's an ownership and a buy-in, that's when the magic happens. Next week, we'll talk about ways of making that happen, ways of beginning to make that happen. We're going to build like a scaffold throughout this course. I'm jumping straight in with techniques. So pay attention to your readings. This is something I want you to consider before you do the discussion post. And let me spend a little bit of time discussing this, making sense of this. These are authors. Oh my goodness, what are their names? I didn't give them credit. Of course. I will have to go back, since I've asked you all to provide citations, to find out. I thought it was given down here as the reason why I posted it. This comes from an article, and the authors talked about 3 ways of relating. I thought this was a pretty, even though this may look complex, I thought this was a pretty applicable way of understanding people. We're really looking for the Goldilocks zone here in the middle of this model. And there are inaccurate views, personal awareness, interactions with others, social dynamics, inaccurate social dynamics that happen on either side of this spectrum. And so really view this as a spectrum. We're looking for genuine and realistic connections. We want to have a clear and balanced perspective where we balance our own self-worth with the worth of others, where we're not too aggrandizing, where we're not too narcissistic, versus overly self-critical and denigrating. So on this side, this is somebody with completely low self-esteem, low self-worth. So in the middle here is somebody who's got a balance, it recognizes their own weaknesses, but also that they have strengths. And then on the other side of this, you have someone who could really care less about others because I'm more important. And on either side of this, either side of these, there is disconnection from others. In other words, I don't want to really be around somebody who's completely self-denigrating, who has no self-worth, who has no esteem. I'm just a heel. I didn't really mean to say that. But really, I'm not that good at this. Nobody really wants to be around that person, right? So that makes that person feel even worse. Well, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've already known that I was just socially inept, and now they don't want to be around me, so I'm not even gonna try. Versus the other side of things, where you have somebody completely grandiose and exploits others. Yeah, everybody likes to be my friend. Sure, look what I've got. I've got this cool car. I've got this cool thing. I've got a huge house, and I'm cool to be around. Just look at all my friends. Look at who I hang around. This person, that person, that person, and who doesn't want to be me, right? So I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about that. On either side of those on that spectrum, people don't want to associate, generally speaking, with those folks, which leads to social disconnectedness. Now, I'm not saying the narcissist can't have some really fake and superficial relationships. On the other side of the things, this person may have some pretty superficial relationships too, because people don't want to be sucked into that mire. So there are things that can happen, and I want you to look through this and consider that spectrum. What happens relationally? In the middle, we're compassionate and aware of yourself and others. We use power assertively, but we support our own and others' people's development. Our feedback enriches connection and awareness, and we're receptive to the relational impact that we have on others. On either side, there's entrenchment, and you're either exploited or you exploit others using power. Both of these sides can be rigid and not changing. This leads to responsiveness, responsibility, and flexibility. So think about yourself and where you might lie. You don't have to necessarily reference this, but I want it to be a part of what we reflect on. So consider the discussion. The discussion can be found. There is a link here, but the prompt is actually here. And so I'll probably add a little bit to that on the first page, but I hope this has been helpful. This is our first week's lecture. Most weeks we'll have something like this. I won't have the whole train of lectures like I did this week. I'll generally have one video where I'm talking about what to expect during the week of class, but reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will see you online. Take care.